Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than just Peyton Manning. I'm also motivating Manning. When I say insurance, you say financial services. Insurance.
Financial services.
Insurance.
Financial services.
Now when I say Nationwide, you say is both. Nationwide.
Is both.
Nationwide.
Is both.
For your insurance and financial needs, Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Investment Services Corporation, member FINRA, Columbus, Ohio.
This message is brought to you by Apple Card. You left your wallet in the car, or was it at home? No need to panic. With your iPhone, you can tap to pay using Apple Card with Apple Pay and earn unlimited daily cash back when you do. Apple Card is ready when you need it, subject to credit approval. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1048 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, thanks for tuning in. Before I get to the trends this week, I just want to remind you guys to subscribe to the Late Round newsletter. It's absolutely free. It costs $0. All you got to do is head to lateround.com, click newsletter, and submit your email address. That's it. You won't get these trends in that newsletter, but each week during the season, you'll get the list of 15 transactions from the 15 transactions episode. You'll get the weekly data dump that I publish on Twitter and on Blue Sky, and you'll get a nice recap of everything from David Kitchen at the end of the week. Out of season, I send out studies. I do other research articles all the time. That's lateround.com, then click newsletter. Okay, now let's get to these trends. Most quarterbacks are going to play better indoors than outdoors. Most games, they're going to see a little bit of a bump in scoring when they're in a dome. It's just a better environment when we obviously don't have to deal with outside factors like weather. I bring this up because the Lions are on the verge of playing a lot of games indoors. In fact, they only have 2 more outdoor games in the fantasy football season, with those games coming over the next couple of weeks. After they face the Eagles in Week 11, they'll be at home against the Giants, at home against the Packers, at home against the Cowboys, in LA to face the Rams, in Detroit again against the Steelers, and then in Minnesota. All those games that I just mentioned are being played in a dome. So the trend here, it's domes. It's a trend I've never talked about on this show before. But there are lots of indoor games for the Lions to finish up this fantasy football season. And that should hypothetically be a boost to that offense. So far this season, Lamar Jackson has averaged 23.8 standard fantasy points per game. That's the QB1 overall by points per game. Joe Flacco has played 4 games with the Bengals. In those 4 games, he's averaged 25.0 points per game. In other words, Joe Flacco as a Cincinnati Bengal has been the best fantasy football quarterback so far in 2025. And here's the kicker. Cincinnati quarterbacks have a top 5 rest of season and playoff schedule according to my adjusted fantasy points allowed numbers. Now, surely he won't keep this up. But after doing my rest of season rankings, I'm a good 7 quarterback spots higher than the market with Joe Flacco. I don't see why you wouldn't be a quarterback. You should always be aggressive with that position in fantasy football. Something else that caught my eye when doing rest of season rankings this week kind of has to do with the transaction from yesterday's show. But Aaron Jones is still being ranked below Jordan Mason consistently. I know he had that shoulder injury, but we're talking like 6 to 10 running back spots here. But in games where Aaron Jones has been active this year, Jordan Mason has honestly been unusable. He's averaging just 5.2 PPR points per game with Aaron Jones active. He's yet to score more than 8.5 PPR points in one of those contests. And his target shares have been at or below 5% in 3 of those 4 games. That's just something to note as you potentially go out and trade for Jones this week. The Panthers' backfield did indeed shift this past week, big time. Rico Dowdle outsnapped Chuba Hubbard 42-13 on Sunday against the Packers. He ran 12 routes, Hubbard ran 4. That's according to PFF. Based on his usage, PFF's expected fantasy points formula had Dowdle at 21.5 PPR points. He outperformed that, but a 21-point baseline is still pretty wild. Dowdle has now seen more than 60% of the team's running back rushes in 3 games this year. In those games, he scored 32, 34, and 28 PPR points. To put that another way, Rico Dowdle is to me in RB1 discussions rest of season. Now, speaking of that Panthers backfield, someone in the late round Discord yesterday was asking about my anti-Chuba stance over the summer. And so I went back and I looked at some of the stuff that I worked on when researching for drafts this year. One of those things being what I think is the most important research piece of my year. I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back because trust me guys, I know I'm far from flawless. Remember Travion Henderson? This is purely a research and process thing. It's also something that can be very helpful moving forward. But middle round running backs, which I define as RB19 to RB42 by ADP, middle round running backs who have had poor previous season yards per route run rates have historically underwhelmed the following season. So back in June, I wrote an email on that subject, speaking of the newsletter. I also did a podcast episode 996. It was called A New Way to Spot Middle Round Running Back Breakouts. That newsletter, though, it was on risky middle round running back profiles based on yards per route run. And here's the list of the risky running backs that I talked about. Tyrone Tracy, Brian Robinson, Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson, Jordan Mason, and Chuba Hubbard. Hubbard's 0.51 yards per route run rate was worst among all middle round running backs. Now, we have no idea what the middle rounds of drafts are going to look like next year. And we still have just a limited sample this year. But players who have been very inefficient per route run this season according to PFF data include Tony Pollard once again, Tyrone Tracy once again, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Kamani Vidal, Alvin Kamara, J.K. Dobbins, Javonte Williams, Jordan Mason again, Zach Charbonnet, and Isaiah Pacheco. Those are sort of the higher end players or the usable players who just haven't looked great this year in yards per route run. So if that continues, and if we find ourselves drafting them in the middle rounds next year, we may want to think twice. And of course, I'm going to talk about this during the offseason. It was just top of mind, so I wanted to share. So I originally had a Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave trend in the spot this week, and how the Saints with Tyler Shuck gave Shaheed a really high target share and a really high first read target share in week 9. And then he was traded. But I still kind of want to talk about Rashid Shaheed. Now, this trend is not super takey. Don't get too excited. But the Seahawks, in my opinion, made this move for Shaheed for versatility purposes. On the season, only the Steelers have run less 11 personnel than the Seahawks have. This isn't new for Clint Kubiak. Last year with the Saints, New Orleans also ranked 31st in 11 personnel usage. That's 3 wide receiver sets. And you can't ignore that Kubiak, now in Seattle, probably wanted Shaheed again because he knows how impactful he can be. The Seahawks now have Jackson Smith-Njigba, Shaheed, Torrey Horton, and Cooper Kupp. Maybe that Kupp injury, maybe it's a little bit worse than what's being reported. But also, he's just been kind of fine this year. Now, Torrey Horton, who I've been excited about, he definitely takes a hit with this trade. But with Shaheed, he's paired up with a quarterback who can hit him better down the field. Among relevant quarterbacks this year, Sam Darnold is first in the NFL in average depth of target. Shaheed had an ADOT this year of just 11.3. Last year with Kubiak, it was 18.1. So to me, this move for Shaheed, it signals flexibility for the Seahawks. They get more depth at wide receiver. They get a guy who can really stretch the field to pair him with a quarterback who can get him the ball down the field. And from a trends to look out for standpoint, maybe we see this offense run a little bit more 11 personnel. But I'd want Shaheed behind JSN in that offense from a fantasy standpoint. Torrey Horton has a chance to develop into something that's better than Shaheed currently is, but there's no doubt in my mind that this is a great real-life fit. Now, I don't even know if that was a trend or not, but we're just rolling with it. Mark Andrews has just become such an insane fantasy asset. He hit just a 15.1% target share per game rate last season, but he ended up scoring 11 touchdowns. Since 2011, among the tight ends with 10 or more touchdowns in a season, the average target share for those tight ends was over 20%. We rarely get 15% target shares and 11 touchdowns. But we know Andrews is a red zone threat, and Lamar Jackson loves to look for him there. Last year, he was 7th in the NFL in end zone target share, which is the percentage of team targets that land in the end zone. Because the Ravens were good and they had a lot of those opportunities, he was 2nd in end zone targets per game. This year, Andrews is 5th among tight ends in end zone target share. Meanwhile, according to Fantasy Life data, Isaiah Likely hasn't seen a single end zone target. So I can sit here and tell you that Andrews doesn't have the most amazing target share, that he's basically running the same number of routes as Isaiah Likely. But he's a touchdown threat every week, and that can carry him in fantasy football. Otherwise, he'd be pretty irrelevant and mostly just a streamer. Alec Pierce could have easily been a 15 transactions player, but I went against it because of that team's upcoming schedule. But he's been low-key getting it done. He's seen target shares of 31%, 18%, and 27% over his last three. He's had 28 targets over that time frame. And he scored about 15, 9, and 18 PPR points in those 3 games. Pierce is currently top of the league in air yards per game. That's if you exclude Malik Neighbors because he's out for the season. Like I said, I hate the upcoming schedule, but he's having a pretty underrated season in that surprising Indianapolis offense. The Arizona Cardinals' Week 9 backfield usage, it was a mess. More of a mess than what most thought it would be. It definitely was not Bam Knight's backfield. Knight did play the most snaps at 58%, but he trailed Amari DiMercado in rush share. He oddly then ran more routes than Amari DiMercado did. That's a surprise to me given how the Cardinals have deployed DiMercado in the past. Knight had a solid 51% route share though. I think because of that, if you were to pick one back to roster until Trey Benson's back, it'd probably be Knight. Probably. But the answer is more than likely none of the above. It's just too unpredictable. And yes, I'm still way higher than the market on Trey Benson. I don't think he's a smash, but he's someone I'd be willing to take a chance on given the price that you might have to pay, which could realistically, right now, just be some bench assets. This last trend is about the Broncos wide receivers, specifically 2 of them. Over Denver's first 5 games, Courtland Sutton averaged 16.1 PPR points per game. He had a 22.9% target share per game rate. Over his last 4 games, Sutton's averaged an 18% target share per game rate and just 10 PPR points per game. Meanwhile, over Troy Franklin's first 5 games, he averaged a 19% target share per game rate. He had 10.6 PPR points per game. Over his last 4, he's been at 12.8 PPR points per game, so more than Sutton, while averaging almost 24% of Denver's targets. Over the last 4 weeks, Troy Franklin has out-targeted Courtland Sutton 32-25. Now, I dug into this with fantasy points data. And in that first stretch of 5 games, Courtland Sutton had a first read target share of about 28%. Troy Franklin was at 19%. Over their last 4, it's Troy Franklin who's been closer to that 28% mark. Sutton is down to 19%. Basically, they've just completely flipped. What we've been learning over the last month is that Courtland Sutton is seemingly as volatile as he's always been. And Troy Franklin is probably undervalued. And in my opinion, based on rankings, he is undervalued. We'll have to monitor to see if all of this continues. But it's definitely a major, major trend. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow with the Weekly Sleeper Show.
Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get chicken parmesan delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes. Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than just Peyton Manning. I'm also motivating Manning. When I say insurance, you say financial services. Insurance.
Financial services.
Insurance.
Financial services.
Now when I say nationwide, you say is both. Nationwide.
Is both.
Nationwide.
Is both.
For your insurance and financial needs, Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Investment Services Corporation, member FINRA, Columbus, Ohio.